الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد عليه أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم وعلى آله الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه الطيبين ومن استنى بسنتهم إلى يوم الدين ثم أما بعد. We begin as we should and as we always do with the name of Allah, the most beneficent and the especially merciful, and we ask Him and Him alone to send His peace and His blessings upon our dear beloved teacher, leader, and guide and the best of examples, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his pure family, his good companions, and any and all of those who would attempt to follow in their footsteps until the day that we meet our Creator. Allahumma ameen. That's what follows. So, alhamdulillah, we are covering, I think now, this is the 22nd session in Ad-Da'wa wad-Dawa, or Al-Jawab al-Kafi liman sa'ala an al-Dawa al-Shafi, the sufficient answer for the one who is asking for the cure for the sickness or for the poison. Right? By Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah. May Allah have mercy on him. He was a prominent, if not the most prominent student of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah in the 8th century. He stayed with him for more than a decade, studying and learning from him and being a disciple directly under him, absorbing much of his writings, his mannerisms, his character, his usloob, the way that he gave da'wah. But one of the ways that Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah distinguished himself is that he had a tremendous focus on spiritual matters of the heart, and he had a little more gentle nature than his Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. And subhanAllah, this is one of those books where he is delving into the matters of the heart, matters of spirituality, the importance of focusing on the heart, fixing the heart, tending to it, maintaining it on a regular basis, not just when it's stricken with some dire sickness or some cancer, but just even on an ongoing, regular basis, maintaining a certain level of spiritual fitness, right, and health. That cannot be overlooked, that many of us unfortunately overlook, even though you'll have people talking about intermittent fasting or talking about, how to get in shape, how to lose weight, how to do, whatever. Shaykh al-Islam, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, focused heavily and a great deal on this, which is partly why we chose this book, because of the lack of people focusing on that in their learning of Islam, in their learning of the deen, in their learning of fiqh and hadith and tafsir and aqidah, which are all important, integral, necessary sciences in Islam that we should be studying, that we should be familiar with, even if you're not a scholar, even if you're not a shaykh, even if you're not an alim, even if you're an Uber driver or a stay-at-home mom, or you're a CEO, or you have multiple, streams of income and a side hustle. If you're an engineer, if you're it doesn't matter. All of these different sciences we should be intimately familiar with. But ultimately, at the end of the day, right, the point of those and the reason for those being there is so that we can have a greater khashya, humility of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and live up to that, and to practice that as much as possible in our lives, right? And, Jazakallah khair to Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, khair al-jazak, for what he has done in his numerous works, including this one, and we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala benefit him and us by the knowledge that he has presented here, and may we take the best of it, inshallah. Allahumma ameen. So, inshallah, today, hopefully we'll be covering 2, maybe 3 things, inshallah, that the Shaykh goes into after having talked about zina, its destructive nature, and how harmful it can be to one's soul, the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now we're going to be talking about the causes or the means of having an evil or bad end. And by end, we mean when you leave from this world, right? When you die. When you essentially, and at least in regards to this life, when you cross that finish line. Or take a dirt nap, whatever you want to call it. There are means and causes to have an evil end that are indicative for that person about what's to come. Right? About what's to come. And so there are causes and means why that would happen. So we'll talk about that inshallah from the speech of the Shaykh inshallah. And then also to touch briefly on the consequences from a Shari'i perspective when it comes to a liwat or shudud or homosexuality. I'm not going to take too long on that because we've already talked a little bit about it, but just to show the opinions that the Sahaba, ridwanullahi alayhim, what they how they thought about it and what they thought should be done about it if someone was to be found in that act, right? And some scholars who came after them, notably, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi, and so on. And then, when it comes to a shahawat, or desires, what are some of the remedies, what are some of the answers to someone having spiritual ailments and a sickness? They have some sin that they just can't seem to shake. It was something that started off as some simple, or at least in their eyes or in their mind, some little guilty pleasure, but then it turns into something that becomes an ongoing habit, then it becomes someone's second nature, till, wa'iyadu billah, even like you see in today's time, where someone may describe who they are by their sin. Where someone wouldn't say that, for example, that they just committed wa'iyadu billah, a homosexual act, but rather they describe themselves by that act as to who they are, that I am a homosexual, they would say, right? And so that is a step-by-step process. How do you address that and respond to that, which is the basis of the whole book anyways. When that young man, when he asked, Sheikh, what do the scholars say of someone who's afflicted with a sin? They keep coming back to it, they try to leave it off, they try to stop, they try to quit, they try to not call, they try not to visit or meet up with, they try not to do it. But no matter what they did, it only seemed to get deeper and deeper and deeper into it. So he said, Sheikh, help me out with this. Give me some way out. And so the Sheikh, he's going to talk about that finally directly, about what he thinks that the young man is doing. So, inshallah. All right, so with that being said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, قال المصنف رحمه الله نفعنا وإياه بعلمه في الدارين اللهم آمين. أسباب سوء الخاتمة. قال الحافظ أبو محمد عبد الحق بن عبد الرحمن الإشبيلي رحمه الله تعالى قال واعلم أن لسوء الخاتمة أعاذنا الله منها أسبابا ولها طرق وأبواب أعظمها الانكباب على الدنيا والإعراض عن الآخرة والإقدام والجراءة على معاصي الله عز وجل وربما غلب على الإنسان ضرب من الخطيئة ونوع من المعصية وجانب من الإعراض ونصيب من الجراءة والإقدام فملك قلبه وسبى عقله وأطفأ نوره وأرسل عليه حجبه فلم تنفع فيه تذكرة ولا نجعت فيه موعظة فربما جاءه الموت على ذلك فسمع نداء من مكان بعيد فلم يتبين المراد ولا علم ما أراد وإن كرر عليه الداعي وأعاده. So the Sheikh, he is quoting another notable scholar who said, and so he's quoting him, he says that know that an evil end or a bad and terrible end, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all from this, Allahumma ameen. He says it has means and causes, and it has roads and doors to get to it. And the greatest of that is to completely immerse oneself in the dunya, to become consumed with materialism, right? And with the dunya, and being prioritizing over all else, your work, your children, your husband, your wife, your schooling, your degree, your team, right? Your tribe, your group, whatever it is, that is more priority to you than anything else, and it causes you to have i'rad an al-akhirah, that you essentially turn away from the ultimate reality, right? The akhirah, the hereafter, right? And he says, not only that, but someone starts to go towards and turn towards sinning and disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that they are actually have the audacity and the cavalierness at the same time. One, they're audacious, meaning that they are, in a false sense, being brave, like in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That, so what if I disobey you? And they treat it like it's not that big a deal. That's what I mean by being cavalier about it, right? So what? So what if I disobey you? Because they become so immersed and enamored with whatever it is, right? That their boyfriend is more important to them. Their girlfriend is more important than anything else. Their, like I said, their business. So what if I'm getting haram? I'm getting that bag. So what if it's haram money? So what if there's interest, right? And so they don't care about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that regards, right? And he said, not only that, but that can ultimately end up overtaking a person to the extent that whatever sin that they've become immersed in and addicted to, that it can eventually overtake their heart. And not only overtake their heart, he says it even takes their intellect, their mind, is even taken captive. And so now what happens, that it puts out the light that they have in their heart. Right? That's the light that a believer is supposed to have from their faith. That's supposed to help them, to guide them, to be a means of distinguishing between what is right and what is wrong. That light becomes dimmer and dimmer until eventually, it could even be altogether put out. Right? And he says, وَأَرْسَلَ عَلَيْهِ حُجُبَهُ. And then there's a complete covering over it that's sent to them. And so now, what ends up happening, if they completely turn away from the akhirah, the ultimate reality, and they completely turn into the dunya, and that's what matters most, he says there will come a point where even a reminder won't even benefit them, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَى تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and give a reminder, because most certainly or most definitely, a reminder benefits the believers. So that implies certain things. That means that sometimes a believer might forget. The fact that they even need to be reminded would mean sometimes they're distracted. Sometimes they stray off a little bit. But they still have that iman, they still have that faith. And so when someone comes and reminds them, astaghfirullah, sister fear Allah, brother fear Allah, ilahi kapso, it would benefit them. There will be some type of, them waking up and like, oh, astaghfirullah, you're right, jazakallah khair. I appreciate that. Right? They'll benefit from being around good company, being in good places and so on. But if, like what the Sheikh just described, he said that won't benefit that person. It doesn't matter what you say to them. Matter of fact, it might even come to at the point of their death, and they're still in that state. And even at that point, even when they're on their deathbed, right? He said, someone trying to remind them and someone trying to tell them, right? Let's say, may Allah protect us, right? Somebody on their deathbed, cancer, at the hospital, family around them, and someone trying to tell them, "Qul la ilaha illallah." Just say la ilaha illallah. The doctor said, "Khalas." You know what I'm saying? They've tried every treatment. Hospice ain't even gonna do nothing for you. They're saying like you have like hours. Say la ilaha Muhammad Rasulullah. He said it'll be as if this person is hearing someone call them from far away. Ba'idan. فَلَمْ يَتَبَيَّنِ الْمُرَادِ. And he said, and it won't be clear what that person is trying to tell them. They won't even be able to comprehend and absorb what's being said to them. You know, and he says, وَلَا عَلِمَ مَا أَرَادَ. And you won't know what they want, and even if they were repeated over and over and over again. And then he mentions a number of different examples of different, notable people who, at the time of their death, when they were on their deathbed, their sons or their daughters would be there with them at the time of their death, right? Telling them, say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. And they would say, where is my general, right? So there was someone who was a soldier, right? And that's all he kept repeating. Every time he would lose consciousness, and then when he would wake up, he would say, where's my Mawla? Where's my Mawla? Ain't a Mawla, right? And then he ended up dying on that, simply repeating that over and over again. And he mentions a few instances of that. And even he mentions a statement of Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah, that he was crying. And he was crying from the night all up until sunrise, right? And then when the sun rose, فَلَمَّا أَصْبَحَ قِيلَ لَهُ كُلُّ هَذَا خَوْفًا مِنَ الذُّنُوبِ. He said, or he was asked, are you crying all of this, right? Basically all night, because of sin or because of transgressions and disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Wa alaykum as-salam, he said. And he said, or his response was, فَأَخَذَ تُبْنَةً مِنَ الْأَرْضِ. He essentially grabbed some dust, right? And he said, الذُّنُوبُ أَهْوَنُ مِنْ هَذَا. He said, sins are less than this dust. They're worth nothing, right? Obviously, they don't benefit you, right, in the akhirah. He said, they're worthless. He said, وَإِنَّمَا أَبْكِي مِنْ خَوْفِ سُوءِ الْخَاتِمَةِ. He said, but what's causing me or making me cry is I'm afraid and I'm fearful and apprehensive of having an evil end. I'm afraid of that. Now, mind you, Sufyan al-Thawri was considered one of the most knowledgeable scholars in his time. And there was only a handful of contemporaries who would be mentioned in the same sentence in his time, right? And he is crying all night into the morning, saying that I'm afraid of having an evil end, right? And then, so this should make us think, well, what about us? If he's this notable, tremendous scholar, defending the Sunnah, calling to the Quran, calling to the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And many may not even know, or many of us may not know, right? Many fiqh opinions, right, are attributed to Sufyan al-Thawri, right? Like you have Imam al-Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmed, rahimahumullah, may Allah have mercy on all of them, right? There are a number of other scholars, right, who were just as notable. Some even said to have been even greater scholars than them, like Imam al-Layth, rahimahullah, right? And like Imam Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah. But their opinions, they may not have had as many students as like Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, who essentially canonized and encapsulated his madhab and his opinions, wrote them down, spread them, had students who spread essentially like exponentially, right? But the point though is that what? He was busy and dedicated himself to preserving the religion, spreading the religion, proselytizing, calling to the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and yet at the end of the day, after all of that, essentially a life of scholarship and dedication to Allah, the deen of Allah, he's crying, worried about his sins. So then what about us and how we are, right? Where, you know what I'm saying, at the very least, we would say that we're not completely and utterly just making da'wah all day, imams at the masjid, hafizat, right? And that's all we're doing. We got to go to work, take care of the kids, do this and that, bills, responsibilities, there's many other things that we're doing, right? And that's just the nature of the beast being here in America, Allah musta'an. Very few don't have that. So then, how many sins, mistakes, shortcomings, forgetfulness, stuff that we should have done, but we wrongly prioritized something else, thinking that we were doing the right thing? How much should we be concerned about and worried about having an evil end? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. Allahumma ameen. So then he goes on. وَقَدْ ذَكَرَ الْإِمَامُ أَحْمَدْ عن أبي درداء رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه لما احتضر جعل يغمى عليه ثم يفيق ويقرأ بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ونقلب أفئدتهم وأبصارهم كما لم يؤمنوا به أول مرة ونذرهم في طغيانهم يعمهون. And this is the 110th ayah from Surah Al-An'am. In it, so essentially, Abu Darda, radiallahu anhu, a very notable and prominent companion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was known for his piety and his indifference to the dunya, right? That's what zuhud is meant. Doesn't mean that you can't have good things, but his indifference, whether I have it or I don't have it, I don't care about the dunya. That's what zuhud is. When he was nearing his death, or on his deathbed, he was going in and out of consciousness. And as he was going in and out of consciousness, when he would regain consciousness, he would repeat this same ayah, which is, we shall turn their hearts and eyes away from guidance. We shall turn their hearts and eyes away from guidance as they refuse to believe therein for the first time, meaning in the dunya, right? And we shall leave them in their trespassing to wander blindly. I.e., they had an opportunity to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were shown the truth, right? But because of their refusal, because of their insistence on disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the relationship with the topic, right? Or the chapter, is that their insistence on disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and their refusal to submit to Him, khalas, Allah says, then we will turn you away. Your heart, your eyes, khalas. And we will leave you to your own devices to wander blindly, like as if you were in the dark. If that's what you chose, that's what you want. Which ultimately means what? That this person, in the end, will have su'ul khatima, that they will have an evil end. Right? And then he goes on, فَمِنْ هَذَا خَافَ السَّلَفُ مِنَ الظُّلُوبِ أَن تَكُونَ حِجَابًا بَيْنَهُمْ وَبَيْنَ الْخَاتِمَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ. He said, and it is from this, understanding that many of the Salaf are, the pious predecessors or our ancestors, right, in the deen, that they had the understanding and the concern that sins would be a barrier between them and having a good end, right? They thought that this would cause them to have a barrier in a good end. Just like sins cause you to have a barrier between you and Allah, between you and your iman and your faith, just how it has this severing effect of anything positive in your life, right? Similarly, in the end of your life, when you would hope that, khalas, you're kind of like, that you're returning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm done, I'm ready to go. Just like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? When he was given the opportunity, when he was on his deathbed, and he was asked, which do you want? Do you want this dunya, or do you want to go back to Allah? And he said, Rafiq al-A'la, right? That's what he wanted. And so, but for us, or for people who are disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will cut you off, right? Because it's supposed to be, مَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ فَلْيَعْمَلْ عَمَلًا صَالِحًا وَلَا يُشْرِكْ بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ أَحَدًا. Right? For anybody who hopes, they're hoping to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لِقَاءَ رَبِّهِ, right? And the day of judgment, right? And they believe in the day of judgment, then they're supposed to work righteous actions. But if you're busy disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sinning against Him, then that gets in the way of that. And then ultimately what ends up happening, right, is that you end up having a horrible death. There's a movement, one that is outside of the fold of Islam, but ascribes themselves to Islam, called Ahmadiyya. Excuse me. Right? And this group, one of the things that they said was that there is a prophet and messenger after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that, of course, that in and of itself, to believe that and to claim that is disbelief. That takes someone outside the fold of Islam, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described him as being Khatim al-Nabiyyin, that he was the seal of the prophets and messengers. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions as such, right? So now you are contradicting Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And with him, so one of the things, if I remember correctly, his name is Mirza Ghulam. Mirza Ghulam, if I'm not mistaken, was the head of that movement, right? And used to call to that, among other things. Used to say a lot of different things, but this is not big enough. Al-Muhim, the manner in which that he died, and we're talking about Su al-Khatima, right? He died, right, in the end, with his head in his way. He went from claiming and telling people that I am just calling to the way of Allah, I'm calling to the deen, then he took it up and elevated a step, saying that not only am I just calling to the deen, not only am I just a righteous person, but I am a prophet and a messenger and so on, right? So no doubt his followers in his time would have respected him, honored him, treated him well, right? Accolades, you know what I'm saying? Essentially whatever, right? You're the leader of this group. But his end was something entirely different, right? And with him, So then the Shaykh, he closes this chapter by saying, قال واعلم أن سوء الخاتمة أعاذنا الله تعالى منها لا تكون لمن استقام ظاهره وصلح باطنه ما سمع بهذا ولا علم به ولله الحمد وإنما تكون لمن له فساد في الأصل أو إصرار على الكبائر وإقدام على عظام فربما غلب ذلك عليه حتى ينزل به الموت قبل التوبة فيأخذه قبل الإصلاح الطوية فيظفر به الشيطان عند تلك الصدمة يختطفه عند تلك الدحشة وعياذ بالله. So Imam Ahmed, he quotes Imam Ahmed here saying that, and know that having an evil end, may Allah protect us from this, does not happen. لا تكون لمن استقام ظاهره وصلح باطنه. This doesn't happen. An evil end does not happen to somebody who is righteous and good and virtuous, both in public and they're in private, right? That they're outside and who they are on the outside matches with who they are on the inside. He says, "What This is like unprecedented and unheard of. That doesn't happen. All praise and thanks is due to Allah. But rather, it is for someone who they're very fundamentally who they are. If you remember, I mentioned, right? Somebody is doing something, some sin, some small minor sin or whatever, but then they keep doing that and doing greater and bigger things until it becomes a habit, and then that habit becomes second nature, and then second nature, right, becomes who they are. He says for those people, that their sin, that becomes who they are. And that's what's their priority. And that's what's more important than anything else. And they choose that over Allah, time and time again. Every time they get the opportunity, he says it's for those people, right, that they have an evil end. Because they are perpetually disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not with some simple or minor sins, but with major sins, a wrong, right? And he said, and it very well would be that person, right, has the opportunity to make tawbah, and it passes them by until they die on that, right? Now, we have to ask ourselves, right, we hear every week, or you should if you go to Jumu'ah, right? In the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. Right? So here you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about what your end should be like. Right? The state that you should be in, right, when you die. And he says, and don't die except وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ, except that you are Muslims or in a state of submission to his will. So what is essentially what are we being told? You have to ask ourselves. What are we being told if we're being told, don't die as a Muslim? Okay, let me ask you this. Do you know when you're going to die? Does anybody know? No. Nobody knows when you're going to die. So then how am I supposed to obey Allah? How are you and I supposed to obey Allah to not die except as a Muslim? How can you do that? How can you ensure that?
So pray every day. Make prayers and do what you're told. Read the Quran.
Prayers.
Classes.
Classes. Prayer. Read the Quran. Do what you're told. Okay. No, that's good.
To avoid major sins as much as possible.
To avoid major sins as much as possible. Oh yeah. What else?
Enjoining good and forbidding evil.
Enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. Absolutely. Alhamdulillah. Right? كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. Right? Of course. Now, yes. Sir.
To stay away from shirk.
To stay away from shirk. Okay. How about this? For how long?
Your whole life.
Your whole life.
For how often? Sometimes, once in a while.
Always be a Muslim.
Always. Every year, every month, every day, every minute. Because you don't know. Matter of fact, the angel of death himself doesn't know when he's going to come knocking on your door. He is simply waiting for Allah to tell him, take him, this is his appointed time, that's his appointed time, that's it. Nobody knows. And so the only way, and even then it's not a guarantee. Even then it's not a guarantee, but the only way to make an attempt to fulfill that command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to live every moment as a Muslim. To live day to day in the submission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? No matter what project is in front of you, no matter what's happening in front of you, no matter what issue is happening politically, no matter what's happening in the world, no matter what's going down with your family, no matter what's happening with your husband, your wife, your kids, it doesn't matter. Your business, because you see, brothers and sisters, there comes, us living here, oftentimes people, I shouldn't even say just here, but in general, in the world, in today, people compartmentalize when they will be Muslim, when they will surrender to Allah, and when they won't, right? I am a Muslim when it comes to my dress, when it comes time to prayer, rituals, etc., right? But when it comes to the issue of, let's say, for example, social justice, then it's something different. Then it's a different matter entirely, right? If it comes to that, then it's either I'm feminist, first wave, or second wave, or third wave. Those are who are going to guide me when it comes to how I should handle those issues. Or as a husband and a wife, and a husband is upset with his wife, right? And when he's upset with his wife and things aren't going so well, as opposed to him being a Muslim and still dealing with the issue and the matter, whether she was good and right and just and submissive and accepted his leadership, or she didn't, and she was talking back and doing things that he didn't want her to do, whatever. At the end of the day, he's still supposed to be what? Muslim, but he's not. Oftentimes he's what? He reverts back to his natural instincts, how he grew up, his culture, how he saw his mom and his dad do it. And so that's how they'll do it. Y'all, I remember when I used to assist another imam at a masjid. And one of the things he had asked me to come and assist him with was about divorce. And we were dealing with a particular issue, and then he called me again to assist him again. And then again. I was like, Sheikh, how many of these you'll be dealing with? And he told me, right? He said, this is one of the issues that I deal with the most. He says, at the very least, at least 2-3 times a month, I'm called to court, right? To be an expert witness with people's divorce proceedings, right? And one of the biggest issues was the way that people treated the issue of their children. Because divorce is not haram, right? It's not the end of it's not the worst thing. It's not good, obviously, but it's not the worst thing. It is halal, it is a means that things don't work out between two people. But the way that they would treat the issue of their kids had very little to nothing to do with Islam. Oftentimes a man, he would divorce a woman, and it was as if he divorced his kids too. He's not going to visit them. He's not going to send them no money. He might move out the country. He starts a whole nother family, and it's a whole nother khalas. And there's so many rights that those children have, even the woman that she would have. But in that particular aspect of it, he's still praying. He's still giving charity to the masjid. In those aspects of his life, he's Muslim. But in this particular thing, he sits down and meets with the imam. He sits down and some sheikhs. They read Quran on him, and it don't matter. This part of my life, that I don't submit that part of my life. Same thing with business. You'll have Muslim businesses, right? MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Brother will be front row at the masjid for years on Jumu'ah and in the prayers. Super generous. But you go to his store and he's selling paraphernalia, he's selling tobacco, he's selling alcohol, he's selling pork, he's selling scales in little baggies, which have very little few uses except for to enable other people to sell drugs. But, so in that aspect of his life, if you said, why would you sell this stuff? Why would you do that? Brother, this is business. This is tijara. This is, you know what I'm saying? I gotta make my money. He treats it as something different, right? Unlike what the Ustad said, I live your whole life as a Muslim. Are we gonna have failings? Absolutely. You're gonna mess up, you're gonna slip up? Of course. All of the sons of Adam, which in turn also means the daughters of Adam, he said all of them make mistakes. that's a given. That's the human condition. But you picking and choosing, right? You picking some. I believe in some of the book, and not other parts. This is mushkila kabira, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this. Do you believe in some of the book? وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضٍ, and you disbelieve in some of the book? That's what it's like. But al-muhim. So to summarize, excuse me, what the Shaykh is saying here, there's a few different hadith that I wanted to share. One is how you finish or how you cross the finish line is extremely important. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ, excuse me, and I want y'all to finish. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِخَوَاتِمِهَا, that your deeds, your actions, how you finish this life is weighed, is looked at, is judged by how you cross the finish line, how you end. And so that should create a drive in us to not become complacent, to not be like, alhamdulillah, my family's Muslim, I was born Muslim, I'm good. Alhamdulillah, my name is Muhammad, my grandfather was a sheikh, you know, I memorized Quran when I was young, or not memorized it, but I read it, you know, I finished it once or twice when I was a kid. I mean, I don't read the Quran no more, but you know, alhamdulillah, I finished it a few times. But now I'm okay. Or I've embraced Islam, I've been Muslim 10, 15 years, I mean, alhamdulillah, mashallah. And then what ends up happening? People become complacent. And that hadith is telling us that you should not do that, but you should stay hungry. And you should stay thirsty. Right? That you should be yearning and wanting and working and trying for Jannah. Hatta ya'tiyaka al-yaqeen. Until that angel of death says, it's time to go. We gotta go. Because once it reaches that point, there is no, well, hold on, can we reschedule? I got a few things, I got a few irons in the fire, I was supposed to do this was supposed to, just let me, no, that's one appointment you cannot put off. And then the last hadith, to show how serious it is. The Prophet ﷺ, he mentions, right, and it's a long hadith, but he mentions about a man who is essentially this close. Right? رجل من أهل الجنة حتى ما يكون بينه وبينها إلا ذراع. There's nothing but between him and paradise, meaning how close he is to death. Because of seemingly the righteous actions that he's doing, the prayer, the fasting, the charity, the jihad, everything that he's doing, and he's only got this long left before he dies, and inshallah Jannah. Right? But what ends up happening? يسبق عليه الكتاب ويعمل بعمل أهل النار حتى يدخلها. But then destiny, or what's written for him, overtakes him, and he ends up doing actions and deeds in the end that make him to be deserving of and to be one of the people of the fire, and he ends up ultimately therein. And then the Prophet ﷺ said there's another person, right? Min ahl an-nar is a person seemingly from the people of the hellfire, i.e. the way that he lived his life, how he was doing things, how he conducted himself or herself, right? حتى ما يكون بينه وبينها إلا ذراع, until there's just between him and that an arm's length. يسبق عليه الكتاب فيعمل بعمل أهل الجنة حتى يدخلها. Then he does righteous actions and he lives every day as a Muslim from that point on. Whether he embraces Islam or whether he or she may tawbah, but they live every moment thereafter, right, as one of the people of paradise until they enter it. And the point is what? And there's another narration of that same hadith, فِيمَا يَبْدُو لِلنَّاسِ. They seem like they're the people of the hellfire, right, because of the actions they were doing in the people. But there was something in their heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided them, and then they did the actions of the people of paradise. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saw something in them that people may not have seen. What the people saw was this person smoking, drinking, doing whatever, philandering. but there was something in their heart, and they changed, and their actions and their living from moment to moment was according to them going to paradise. Y'all understand that? And so, ultimately, it was the end. So what do we benefit from this, brothers and sisters? Who you are at this moment right now, right? That does not have to be who you are. You can still change, so long as you're still breathing, so long as you still can get up, pray fajr, make wudu, give charity, fast, make tawbah, so long as that's still there, right? Until you take a dirt nap. So if you have a few little sins, you know what I'm saying? Or you have this graveyard, big old pile in your backyard, it's still that you can come back from that as long as you're still alive. Because it's not until you take a dirt nap. Allah ta'ala, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from this. So, next, the Shaykh, he goes on, he says, Faslun mafsadatul liwat, the chapter, the, corrupted nature of liwat, or, shuzuz, or homosexuality. He says, وَلَمَّا كَانَتْ مَفْسَدَةُ اللِّوَاطِ من أعظم المفاسد كانت عقوبته في الدنيا والآخرة من أعظم العقوبات وقد اختلف الناس هل هو أغلظ عقوبة من الزنا أو الزنا أغلظ عقوبة منه أو عقوبتهما سواء فذهب أبو بكر الصديق رضي الله عنه وعلي بن أبي طالب إلى أن عقوبته أغلظ من عقوبة الزنا وعقوبته القتل على كل حال محسنا كان أو غير محسن وذهب عطاء بن أبي رباح والحسن البصري, and they're from the tabi'in, the generation after the Sahaba, says إلى أن عقوبته عقوبة الزنا سواء وذهب الحاكم وأبو حنيفة إلى أن عقوبته دون عقوبة الزاني وهي التعزير. So in summary, right, because remember this is an abridged version, in the real book there's a long detailed discussion just exactly how this person is to be punished. And what was the opinion of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and Umar ibn Khattab, and Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Khalid ibn Walid, and so on, right? And ultimately, right, he's essentially mentioning what was their opinion regarding which one is worse. Is zina worse, right, committing adultery, fornication, or is homosexuality worse? Some of them said that homosexuality is worse than zina, likewise their punishments. Some of them were of the opinion that at the end of the day, doesn't even matter. At the end of the day, their punishment is one. Their punishment is one. And then he goes on to mention some of the opinions of, Hassan al-Basri and others. So what I want to bring out, because it's a more detailed scholarly discussion in the opinion of the scholars, what I want to point out and bring to the forefront of our minds is that in today's time there are people who try to act as if Islam has not spoken about this matter. That from the earliest of times, i.e. the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself, and even before that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his glorious book, and that we need to have a new look in Islam as to Islam's stance on homosexuality and the LGBTQIA, act, right? As if that is not something that has not been talked about, dealt with at length, right, in Islam, which it has. And Islam's stance is clear. Islam's stance is clear, not simply from an emotional, cultural, this is something vile and wrong and we don't do that in our community or whatever, but from sacred sources and those who are the vanguard and the leaders of, right, teaching and sharing those two sacred sources, the Quran and the Sunnah, meaning the Sahaba, right, that they dealt with that issue. And so for someone to say at this time, oh, well, it's 2024, and they weren't as enlightened at that time, and they have those are archaic views or etc. And they're not understanding that there is a long, deep, rich, scholastic tradition that Islam has on dealing with a whole host of issues, including homosexuality. Then you also have subhanAllah, there was one more thing that I wanted to mention about that. But inshallah, I think that's enough. Inshallah. But that is not, it's not something new. That issue is not something new. And if anybody really wanted to know what Islam has to say, there is a wealth of information there. In reality, it is us who have a lack of, right, depth and breadth into dipping into that pool of Islamic knowledge. Right? And so, no. I'll tell you. And then the last part, inshallah, faslun ilaj shahawat. The remedy for dealing with desires. And inshallah, because it is salat time, this one is a little bit longer. So I'm just going to touch on it today because he mentions 10 different benefits of the main remedy that he talks about. There are a number of them, but the main one that he talks about, and I'll just touch on that, he mentions 10 benefits of that one particular remedy, and I'll read that next week, inshallah. But today, I'll summarize with the main thing that he talks about is lowering your gaze, right? Because he's talking about desires. And the main driving force to inspire inside of somebody desires is their eyes, what you see, right? Somebody could even be, right, and we're talking about not just sexual desires, but just your base human desires in general. If you see food, right, just you seeing it might make you hungry. You seeing, you know what I'm saying, some drink or whatever might make you thirsty. Your eyes, in short, are a window to the soul. They're a window to your heart. And the way that he describes it, it's almost like secular. In that, if your heart is sick, your eyes will look at things that will make it more sick, that it has no business looking at, right? And then your eyes will continue to look at things that make your heart sick, and so it becomes more and more sick, and the more it becomes sick, the more your eyes look at those things that'll make it sick, and so it keeps doing that, so it looks even more, causing it to become more sick. And it just keeps going like that until you might have cardiac arrest of your spiritual heart, that it might die. But this is, you know, and I've spoken on this multiple times, you know, throughout this reading, khutbahs and so on, is in today's time, especially with devices, especially with the presence of social media, it is ubiquitous, which means it's everywhere, like air. You will see the most wealthiest person have a phone, maybe two, and you will see homeless people who have cell phones. Matter of fact, you can go to the grocery store right now, and they have, every now and then, there'll be somebody set up shop who gives out free cell phones with free internet, right? They are everywhere, right? And so, subhanAllah, we have to remember, brothers and sisters, to be guardful and mindful of our eyes. Because what you see impacts your heart. And when we say it impacts your heart, meaning your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it can cause you to become heedless and less careful and less of a longing and wanting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Because of that. Because it essentially is every time you're seeing something, right, it's putting like a black spot on your heart. And then, of course, the more that happens, the more it becomes covered. The more it becomes covered, the less wasila that you have, the less spiritual drive that you have and desire that you have, the want to prayer, the want to fast, the want to make dhikr, the want to be closer to Allah, the want to be in good company, the want to be in good places, that diminishes and becomes weaker and weaker. And then, of course, if it becomes weaker, right, and you can't, especially with your spiritual sight, you can't see as well, then you begin to make poorer decisions. Those poorer decisions, whether it's the company that you keep, whether it's what you do with your free time, whether it's with the job that you choose to have, and how you make your income, and what you eat, whether it's halal or haram, your decisions and your prioritizing becomes skewed and it becomes weaker. And then of course, if it becomes weaker, then what happens? You become sicker. And if you become sicker, then your choices become even poorer and worse and bad, right? Not in your best interest. Not in your best interest for your spirituality and your spiritual health and your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ultimately, when you're standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that will no longer be priority and you won't care about it. Right? And so, in brief, or in short, brothers and sisters, is being mindful of your social media feed, being mindful of what you watch, being mindful of what you listen to, right? Being very, very careful and being, and I know it's hard because everybody, as we speak right now, I'm streaming this right now, right? And up until recently, I didn't have nobody who I hired or paid, I did all by myself. So I got to jump on there and I got to do, and sometimes you put something and be like, oh, I didn't want to see that, right? Then I got to wait, and I go back, stop for the law, then I got to go back. So I understand that it's not easy. You want to be in the know. You don't want to seem like everybody else is on something. There's something that went viral. Everybody's talking about it, right? But that may be the cost. That may be the cost of you saving your spirituality. You might not know what everybody's doing. You might not be what everybody's talking, watching about, or whatever. I'm not saying that Muslims shouldn't be informed. You shouldn't be willfully ignorant about what's going on around you. Muslims should have a situational awareness. You should know what's going on around you. But there might be some things where, nah, I don't do that. Your coworkers might be talking about something, and you're like, yeah, I don't watch that. Nah, I don't do that. Oh, yeah, we was doing this on the weekend. Yeah, me and my family, we don't get down like that. We don't do that. Okay? Because why? Because not only for you, for my family, for my kids, for my wife, we don't do that. We're protecting something more important. Right? And I'll close with this. You know, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, right? بدأ الإسلام غريبا فسيعود غريبا فطوبى للغرباء. Right? He said that Islam, it started out as something strange, something weird, right? And eventually there will come a point where it will return back to that state, where it is again something strange and weird. What you mean you ain't got a TV in your house? What you mean you don't do this? You don't watch that? You don't do this? You don't go to this place? You don't do that with your, what? You're too strict. You're too harsh. What? You cover your face? Why? You wear gloves? It's too harsh. You're too weird. Why are you doing that? You're doing too much. Your beard, why are you going out your, you got to do that? Why are you wearing those clothes like that? Your pants all above. The Prophet said it's going to come a time where Islam is weird. And Allah understand, even بعض الأحيان عند المسلمين الإسلام أحيانا غريب عند المسلمين. والله المستعان. Even with the Muslims sometimes Islam seems strange. But the Prophet he said what? طوبى للغرباء. Glad tidings. I give you salutations for the people who are strangers. Because it's not easy. It's hard sometimes. It's hard sticking out. It's hard being weird. But you have to do that for yourself. And especially for your kids. Because when you're older, it's a little bit easier to be like, no thank you. I know who I am. Right? But for kids, for teenagers, more than anything else, they want to fit in. More than anything else, they don't want to stand out. More than anything else. And so you have to inculcate in them something that it's okay to be different. That it's good to stand out. That you are a Muslim. Yes, you are different. Yes, there's stuff that they're doing, and sometimes you try, give alternative. But sometimes, Matthew, sometimes there ain't no alternative. And you just got to tell them, no, son, we're not doing that. They doing it, well, why we got to be different? We don't do that. Sometimes you got to tell your daughter, I'm sorry, yeah, alhamdulillah, there was an alternative for this. They got Christmas, we got Eid. But for this thing here, we ain't got no alternative. You just ain't doing it. You're just different. For the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you have a greater priority more than anything else. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us and help us and inspire and motivate us to prioritize Him more than anything else in our lives. Allahumma ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with sacred knowledge and that He benefit us by the knowledge He's already given us and may He increase us in that. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate the suffering and the difficulties of our brothers and sisters in Palestine. May He grant martyrdom and mercy for those who have passed and died fighting in His cause. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate and cure those who have been injured and those who are sick. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alleviate their sicknesses and heal them with a healing that leaves no trace of sickness. Ya Rabbal Alameen. We ask him and him alone to grant fortitude, steadfastness, strength, and patience for those who are still alive and have to remain left behind. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them the strength and the fortitude to continue to move forward. May he return the lands of the Muslims in the hands of the Muslims. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala return Masjid al-Aqsa to the hands of the Muslims. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unite those who are fighting in his cause to be like one fist in the face of those who are the enemies of Islam. Ya Rabbal Alameen. Innahu waliyu dhalika qadirun alayh. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.